Welcome to State of the State. This is a special one-hour edition. I'm Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Travis Rowley, a native Rhode Islander, alumnus of Bishop Hendricken High School and Brown University, and author of 2 books. He was a member of the executive committee of the Rhode Island GOP. He is also a columnist for GoLocalProv.com, and he and his wife Kathy have 4 sons. Welcome to State of the State.
Thank you. Declan, Finn, Shane, Colin.
I bet the elf on the shelf is in your house, right?
That's right, yeah. You arrived.
Well, it's a great time of year to have young kids around, and that's a real blessing. So,
Thank you.
You have a podcast entitled Good Men, and this podcast on December 18th is titled Trump at His Worst. Now, in it you say, and I'm going to quote, "Trump has simply worn out his welcome, and the GOP should let Florida Governor Ron DeSantis take the reins." Maybe you say, Trump should just go away and shut up. You want to expand on those comments?
Yeah.
Pretty profound.
That was a decent paraphrase. I think I was a little more careful than that. I was sort of having a newsletter. I was trying to argue with myself, trying to take those Trump criticisms that I think are valid. How he flies off the handle on Twitter and his social media posts. He's often his own worst enemy, a lot of people say, and this whole thing was centered around his suggestion that you could suspend the Constitution now that what we know about Twitter came to light. All the conservative suspicions are turning out to be true, that there was a censorship and even the federal government was involved. And it's, Trump has always, to me, has always been like this guy where I'm like, fair enough, I see where he's coming from. I think all the things they say about him, he's a fighter, he punches back twice as hard, but things like, when they're out there when the Democrats are out there projecting and calling the limited government right-wingers, the neo-fascists, or fascism light, or
MAGA.
Yeah, the ultra MAGA and all those focus group tested terms that they're smearing us with, which I think are effective. I mean, they're very good at that game. Shooting yourself in the foot and giving them that ammo is people like me who were pretty much anti-Trump in the primaries in 2016. I didn't think he was the guy. I was more of a Cruz, Rand Paul guy. But in the general, there's no contest for me. I mean, it was Trump versus Hillary. You go with a Republican. But he's wearing out his welcome with people like me, and that's what I was trying to say. Because I turned into a very pro-MAGA agenda guy, and a lot of that had to do with just the way they treated Trump. As bad as he is, as flawed as he is, no one deserves the Democratic treatment. For 4 years like that, the Russia stuff. But even his policies, I thought he had a very successful presidency, and you couldn't really complain conservative-wise, especially with the Supreme Court, the 3 justices we got up there. But the explosion of the economy that he accomplished, and I became a real Trump fan, but I just think conservatives and Republicans need to be intellectually honest about Donald Trump. There's good Trump and there's bad Trump, and it's not difficult. You don't have to be such a partisan. You can say, when Trump does something bad, you can say, that was bad. When he does something good, you can say, that was good. That's fine with a guy like Trump, but you don't have to be such a party hack, is the point I was trying to get across. And so I was kind of arguing with myself and saying, if he's going to give the Democrats such fodder, he wants to suspend the Constitution. We told you that the Republicans are fascists. He needs to stop doing that to retain Republicans like me behind him in the primary against a guy like DeSantis, who would make a great candidate. So that's what I was trying to say.
You used the past tense when you said how he was treated for 4 years. He's still being treated that way. I mean,
yeah.
They raid his personal residence. They impeach him after he's out of office, which is, the Chief Justice of the United States is supposed to preside over those. He wouldn't even come across the street to do that. So this treatment has gone on. It's never ending. I think, luckily, he has pretty substantial fortune on his own to pay for lawyers, I guess. But it's just unprecedented the way he was treated in office and subsequently.
Yeah, unprecedented is a great term for Democratic leftist politics. There's no depth that they won't sink to. If there is an institution that is that is influencing the American public, they will get to the top of it. And it starts with, the traditional media for 50 years controlling that, the universities controlling that for decades. Then when social media came around, and before I forget the point, they will politicize the Justice Department, and that is probably a criticism that can fall on both parties, but never doubt that a leftist will take things much further than you ever imagined someone would. They will impeach him 100 times for 100 insignificant things if that means gaining politically. But back to the other point I was going to make about something like social media. When Facebook and Twitter were on the rise 15 years ago, you might remember that the talk from the left is finally democracy. It's going to be the democratization of the internet. The people are going to rise up. They always have this hunch that the people are always behind them, and then they realize that, oh man, conservatives are speaking on here too. Well, there's a lot of Republican things going on, misinformation. They will get to the top of every influential medium and platform, and they'll destroy it or take it over and destroy it in the process. And you see that has happened with the tech sector. I think Twitter, is the tip of the iceberg. I think every single platform, Facebook, Google, YouTube, we've already, I think, conservative suspicions have already been validated, but something like this Elon Musk thing with Twitter, where he's just blowing the box up, Twitter's just the tip of the iceberg. They're all acting in the same manner. The Silicon Valley, the tech sector, is more concentrated left than the universities, where you have these 90% faculties that are registered Democrats. That was egregious for the past several decades, and that's had a huge influence on our culture. What's coming out now is that 99% of the employees are registered Democrats in Silicon Valley or donating to Democrats. I mean, it's pretty telling. I don't think you can doubt what conservatives are saying, which is that there's a real bias that is improperly influencing the debate in the society.
To illustrate your point about Trump perhaps losing people like yourself as supporters, there was a poll, I think, that just came out yesterday that indicates that 61% of registered Republicans, 61%, are against Donald Trump running again, and 30% support his candidacy. Apparently 9% don't care either way. But to me, what this indicates is that Trump's loyal base will stay home if he is not the candidate and does not support or endorse whoever the candidate is. And I don't think Trump's ego will allow him to endorse anybody else in 2024.
Yeah, he's brought a different element to the Republican Party that I don't think was there before. I think Trump brought, in a good way, an energy. He brought a fighting spirit, that the way that the left fights. It's what a lot of people were kind of craving for on the Republican side, that just punching back and telling the media to tell them where they can go. But there's a negative side to that. There's a cult-like atmosphere around him, and Trump doesn't seem to have the character to back away and endorse the next guy. And not that I want him to. If Trump gets the nomination, I think that would be exciting, because the way they treated him, I would love for him to stick it to him. But he brought an element to him that it was, in my opinion, even a little mindless. That's what I mean by a cult-like atmosphere around his presidency. And I was more of like a National Review guy, kind of a dorky, wonky, this party should be the intellectual, because the thugs are over there on the Democratic side. We need to win the argument, and the National Review, if you remember, they came out with an editorial in 2016 that was, these were kind of like the never-Trumpers, even when he got the nomination. And they made the case very strongly why this guy is going to destroy the conservative movement that is the most crucial element of inside the Republican Party to bring this country where it needs to go. We are going to be branded as Trumpers. And I think they had a point. I mean, I think to a degree that has happened, is that they're going to destroy President Trump because he shoots himself in the foot so much and he says we need to get rid of the Constitution, on a whim at 3 o'clock in the morning on Twitter. And they're just going to say, see, that's conservatives. And so they had a point. But Trump, on the other hand, brings a spirit to the Republican Party that I really only saw on the Democratic side, meaning almost like it's our way or the highway, we're not going to back down type of fight. And the only problem with that is if he doesn't get the nomination, or if he can look at numbers like you're reading and just look at look at reality as far as his political chances, I don't know if he's the type of guy who will say, I'm backing down and going to pass my voters on to someone else. I don't know. I doubt it. That makes you a little nervous.
I don't think his ego will let him do it.
Right. He is an egotist. I mean, there's bad Trump and there's good Trump. And some of the things they say about him are true. But all the Democratic, no one plays the drama queen like a Democrat. I mean, they don't care about ego. They don't care about anything they pretend to care about. They don't care about the Constitution. These are the people who for decades have been saying we need to move beyond the Constitution. They promote activist judges who will read whatever they want into the Constitution. But then the minute Trump says something like we need to move beyond the Constitution, like I said, no one plays the drama queen like a Democrat.
The same poll, interestingly, asked the same question of Democrats. Only 19% of Democrats, according to this poll, 19% want Joe Biden to run again. So apparently, his cognitive decline is obvious to them as to most people who watch President Biden's public appearances and his inability to form a coherent sentence, even with the aid of a teleprompter. How would you evaluate the Biden administration's handling of our country's domestic and international affairs so far?
I mean, oh man, what a softball. I mean, F for a grade. I mean, it started with the Afghanistan pullout. He's clearly being handled by, and this is why I, was behind Trump when he got the nomination, because it's not really about the man, if it ever really was, particularly today. It's about the party that surrounds him and the ideology that is undergirding his presidency. Trump surrounded himself with the people who were being friendly to him, which were Republicans. He surrounded himself with career Republicans in his cabinet who could guide him. I mean, Donald Trump didn't choose those three Supreme Court nominees. The Heritage Foundation did, or I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of that. But you know what I mean? His handlers are what's doing this. In the same way, Joe Biden's handlers are telling him what to do. I think that's pretty obvious. The guy's an aged old man who doesn't know what trans rights mean. These are young left-wing ideologues that are surrounding him and guiding his policies. And man, I mean, I can't even something like we're not going to drill for oil. I think Joe Biden is as empty a vessel as it gets. I mean, to win that primary, you have to be an anti-capitalist. You have to say we're not going to drill for oil anymore. Global warming is the most important issue there ever was in this country. Man, I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Biden is now putting his pronouns in his email signature. I mean, so it's that left wing, that far left wing, progressive base that has taken over that party. It's why I've said for a long time that there are no good Democrats left. It's a party that I understand the Kennedy line, and it's not it's not your grandfather's Democratic Party anymore. But at some point, people have to self-assess, look at what the party's become, and ultimately it's on you to realize what's been plain for a very long time, that party is un-American, anti-American, anti-capitalist, and they need to get out before, if this was a fair world and there was a fair press, I would say that in 20, 30, 40 years, the history books would be looking back at what a disgrace the Democratic Party has become. But we don't live in that world. The Democrats, they never have to pay for any mistakes or anything they've ever said or done. It is just move on. And but if the press ever becomes something fair and equal, I just think it's that disgraceful of a party, an embarrassment to be a member of. And people say, it's one of the most maybe controversial things I say. I get a lot of eye rolls when I say that, because a lot of people, one of the most annoying things to me is this. There's a lot of chatter you have to cut through to find out who's telling the truth, and particularly if you're not a politico like say we are. People who are just trying to, around election time, trying to figure things out, and it's like, the truth must be somewhere in the middle, because they both seem like nice guys, and that's just not the case. Sometimes people need to grow up. Sometimes people are lying. Sometimes people are dead wrong. And it's hard for some people to imagine that some people aren't well-intentioned or they're that far off. And I always compare it to a math problem where, 2 + 2 = 4. And if I'm sitting here saying 2 + 2 = 5, and you're over there saying 2 + 2 = 100, the truth isn't somewhere in the middle. You're really going to do better than that and use your head, pay attention a little more, and because the Democratic Party's going off the rails.
Let's talk locally for a minute. Dan McKee won election to the governor's office in Rhode Island, as you know. He crushed his Republican opponent, Ashley Kalis, who appeared on this program, and she actually dumped $5 million of her own money into her campaign. Would you want to prognosticate on the next 4 years under Governor McKee by any chance?
What I've kind of resigned myself to, I was the chairman of the Rhode Island Young Republicans maybe for 5 years, and I was very involved with the Republican Party here. And as more of a youthful idealist, I was really hopeful, because you think at some point that because you're right, because you win the argument in your head, that the voters are going to come along. And I think what's happened is I'm not a pessimist by any chance, but what I started to realize is that it's like trying to flip Detroit Republican. There are no Republicans left in the city to vote. It's the money machine that Republicans are up against here, the Union Democrat machine, which is still here. A Democratic Party that has gone more progressive than when I was involved 10 years ago. The brain drain is real. I think the numbers bear that out, that anyone who is a potential Republican voter is elsewhere. I have a list this long of my friends that are down south and even out west, and I could probably count on one hand how many friends young professionals that are still left in the state. My friends that are still in the state, cops, firemen, teachers, working for the government. Brown University. I played football at Brown University with probably 100 teammates over the course of 4 years. Not one is here. The people that I do know that graduated from Brown University, these are people who come to Rhode Island to go to college and should fall in love with the place and get married and find a corporation and have a career. The only people I know that stayed in Rhode Island are working as staffers in the State House. So that's the opportunity that Rhode Island is basically Atlanta. It's basically Providence. It's basically New York. It's a place where republicanism is almost non-existent, and anyone who potentially would have been a Republican voter and helped out here, that's hurt. It's largely gone. So it's hard to be hopeful for the RAGOP's chance. But I envy them. The people who fight, I never criticize someone who's running for office. That's something that I always kind of told people when I was involved. Would you ever run for office? Would you ever run for office? I like being on the activist side and doing this type of stuff. Running for office, I do not criticize those people because I can't imagine banging on doors and begging for people's votes who don't get it. I really do admire people who stick around and are fighting, but man, I can't lie and say that I think the chances are good.
Well, it's worth noting that the last Republican governor in Rhode Island was Don Carcieri 12 years ago. And the last time we had Republicans in Congress was in the 1980s when we had John Chafee as a senator, Claudine Schneider and Don Makeley were in the House.
I've heard
the only Democrat that was there was Claiborne Pell. And so we've come a long way, and I think the short summation of your response is that you share the view that the Rhode Island Republican Party is pretty much dead, pretty much kaput.
They're not dead. I mean, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, it's a circular firing squad," and it's not a lack of talent. It's not a lack of organization. It's just too small. And the Union Democrats, if they ever get a whiff that someone is actually threatening a seat, they just focus on that district and they bang them out. That's legal corruption. When 50 years ago, when the country at large, and Rhode Island in particular, allowed the government workforce to organize against the taxpayers, until that structure changes, these people get to use your tax money to lobby against you and sit down across the table in a negotiation with the people they got elected and say, pay us more, which means take more money out of the taxpayer's pocket. Until that tax structure and that negotiating structure is gone with the teachers, cops, and firemen and state workers, that's a built-in disadvantage that is really hard to overcome.
In your latest podcast, you have some provocative comments about the radical left in the country. And you say, the radical, that means a person, seeks to destroy our culture with, quote, unrelenting faith that what is to follow will be better. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, the term radical is something that I've been working with for 20 years since my time at Brown University. It doesn't mean, it's good to define these terms. There's a difference between an extremist and a radical. If someone called me a Republican extremist, I wouldn't be offended. What we mean by radical is something pretty different. A radical is someone who is more of a revolutionary, and so unlike a conservative or a traditionalist, has no respect for. And this has no respect for traditions. It's someone who is walking along a field and sees a fence, and that fence is hard to get over. But someone put it there for a reason. He has no respect for that fence. He tears it down because that's his idea. It'll be better. And then, there's 100 great reasons why that fence is there, right? That's what a radical is. And I think I was pointing to the Christian conservative and how different it is from a left-wing radical, where, a radical is also a utopian. He thinks that in this world we're going to, we can get to that heavenly place. Whereas biblical teachings, up and down the Bible, there's talk about, Christ himself said it, that my kingdom is not of this world. Christians are much more apt to be looking to the afterlife for that perfection, and we're here to kind of chase that perfection on an individual level. The radical is a collectivist who's out to seek that utopia on earth, and that's been the story of the Democratic Party and the 60s radicals and the Cultural Revolution here and the sexual revolution. There is no boundary or fence or institution, whether it's pronouns, the English language, marriage. They have an instinctive idea in their head, and anyone whose mind is twisted liberal, like coming out of college, to think this way, anyone who's putting pronouns in their email signature right now or on their Facebook page, please take them down. You look like such a dope. That is. I thought gay marriage was the silliest idea coming down the pike, but it's one of those things where you scream discrimination, you put out the buzzwords, and here come the liberals to back up the progressive idea. That's a radical, someone who has no apprehension to tear down something that might have been built by someone else. Not built by someone else, but something that was time-tested for, say, 5,000 years, something like the term marriage. I think I mentioned that too, is that now the idea is, oh man, this conservative Supreme Court, they might relook at Obergefell and take away our gay marriage. So we need to codify that. And they actually called their legislation the Respect for Marriage Act. When these people looked at 5,000 years of time-tested, the thing that bases civilization, that undergirds our civilization and makes it strong, marriage, they had no respect for that. But several years after their idea is threatened, now we get the Respect for Marriage Act. And I thought the irony and the audacity to name it that was pretty telling too.
One of the most ironic bills I can recall recently is the Inflation Reduction Act, which really involved the government spending more money and taking more control of the economy.
The Democrats have no depth of shame. They will say that whatever the focus group term is, they will name the legislation that. And unfortunately, it works. What they do is good politics, but it's also lying. And that's why, I go back to, I always think of the book, The Rules for Radicals with Saul Alinsky. And, the left kind of rolls their eyes when you bring it up. But that is something that I think Barack Obama was kind of the first time that we saw, oh man, here's a guy who sat in Reverend Wright's church for 20 years, mentored by a communist, Ivy League. It was like that far left wing that we've always kind of been afraid of or laughed at, they're at the helm now. And then Bernie Sanders took over the Democratic Party. And it's here. That politically correct campus culture took over the Democratic Party. The progressives are now in charge of that party. And that has to be a wake-up call. So I think of Rules for Radicals because that was on the NEA reading list. The community organizers, the unions, they use that book as a framework. It's a book that teaches you to lie. It says in it a number of times how to deceive people into getting the votes you want. And here's the NEA saying this is brilliant. Here's Barack Obama teaching it at Columbia. And you just get eye rolls from people who are who can't think that it's that conspiratorial or that it's that organized. But it really is. It's an intellectual movement that has become, you don't really have to read Rules for Radicals now if you're a Democrat. You just have to get in that democratic liberal culture, the activist culture, and go to college, get twisted a little bit, and then all the buzzwords work for you. It's a really scary place that the country's in.
Kind of anticipated this next question I had is, you say in that podcast, progressives don't believe in us, they believe in themselves, and only they can hasten all the progress. When Barack Obama was elected to his first term, he said the transformation of America had begun. He didn't say what it was going to be transformed into, but some political pundits pointed towards the social democratic model of the countries in Europe. Hillary Clinton was supposed to continue that effort, and Donald Trump became a speed bump on that road. Now, Trump employed social media, especially Twitter, the way FDR and JFK used. FDR used radio, JFK was really the first to use television to his advantage. So, am I wrong about this progression that's taking place within the progressives looking at it and saying, I can make this better, or we're going to make this better, just follow us? They
believe in themselves. The term liberal elite is thrown around a lot. That's a perfectly fine term for them. You look back at the real fascist scare of the 20th century was economic central planners. It wasn't, I know World War II was awful and the Holocaust was awful, but that war was also about our enemies who were against economic liberty. I mean, the fascism in Italy and Germany was about a body of elites in a central government that was organizing society for us, particularly the economy. That's what fascism is, right? I mean, it also has to do with beating people with clubs who don't agree with you and shutting down their speech, but that they believe that they should be at the helm. And as it's the irony there is you hear the Democrats today constantly complain about things that the United States government has done. What we did to the Indians, what we did to blacks, slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, all redlining, all government programs that, but it was government that was doing it. They don't realize that they want to expand that power of that government, but that is so awful, the thing they always complain about, but they'll be at the helm. When we run this country, that's when we'll usher in the utopia. That's what a liberal elite is. They believe in themselves. They can't even see past the fact that government is always involved in the things that they complain about. But once we expand it and we can craft our genius ideas, and we can just do one more government program on top of program on top of program until we have a $5, $6, $7 trillion federal budget. Once they are in charge of every dollar, then they're going to usher in the utopia for the United States and the world. And that is a really scary 20th century communist, Hitler's Germany type idea, because that's what they were all about, themselves in control.
Can Republicans, especially conservatives, and I'm going to also throw in moderate Democrats, can they change the trajectory of this movement toward a social democracy? Can it be done?
Yeah, I mean, on a federal level, Republicans are in good shape across the country, I think. The strategy has to be, people always say, what should we do? And I say, walls. And they always think I'm talking about Donald Trump's border wall, which I kind of am. I mean, Trump had these great conservative instincts, I would say, where the genius about a border wall is that it's permanent. Because say Republicans take House, Senate, presidency in 2024. That would be great. But history tells us, and I guarantee you, that the Democrats will be back in power in 4 to 10 years. We don't, whatever, depending on what happens. They will take it back. So you have to put walls up. So if Donald Trump builds a border wall, then the Democrats take power. Well, the wall's there. They can't open up the border if a wall's there. That type of concept. The U.S. Constitution is a wall. It says it doesn't matter who's in power. You can't do these things. You need to return power to the states. States' rights has to be part of the Republican agenda. A whole bunch of liberty amendments. It needs to be like a revitalization of the Bill of Rights. You know, there's probably a number of things we can sit down and discuss, and the people, you know, a confederacy of states need to get together. That's an idea that's brewing. That's probably a really good idea. But
what do you mean by that? I've really never heard that term, confederacy of states.
Yeah, because I used the wrong term. Conference of states.
Okay.
I mean, it's built into the U.S. Constitution.
Enough states get together. Constitutional convention.
Yeah,
at the state level, by the states.
All these red states can get together and make some major changes, build some walls, because, you know, we'll all be dead before we convince all these Democrats of how awful they are. They're not converting, you know, and you know, they have such a sway over the media. You see what they're doing. You need to take power and then make their heads spin by building up things that don't allow them to do. I mean, holding the Supreme Court is great. That's a wall. You know, this Supreme Court is there to say, you know, you want to forgive student loans? Yeah, great idea. You probably get a bunch of liberals who agree with you. Guess what? Strike it down. You know, so things like that. It needs to be return power to the states, make that argument, and go after these minority groups. Go after blacks and Hispanics and all these traditional voting blocks that go Democrat. I mean, they're ripe for change because the Democrats are out there pushing, hey, let me put my boy in your girl's bathroom. I mean, hang that around their necks. They've lost their minds. No border. There are probably 10 issues we could say right now, like the transgender stuff, the open border, just the flat out just anti-capitalism that oozes out of their rhetoric. You need to bring that to these neighborhoods. And school choice, I mean, they've enslaved minorities into these failing schools. You bring those statistics of what happens to these students, you know, who are dropouts in these inner cities, and, you know, where likely they'll end up. Bring that to black families. You know, you make a big crack in the black community, and then all Democrats have left is amnesty. And they're not getting that. That's off the table. You know, when there were 11 million, say, illegals here, and they wanted amnesty for them. And, I mean, you might have had some Republicans thinking we can make a deal. There's no one that's making a deal now. I mean, there's a small country here that they've let in. There's no amnesty coming. I highly doubt you're going to get a Republican to. No, I don't highly doubt it. There'll be a few of them, but the Republican Party, they're going to lose everybody if they make an amnesty deal at this point. So anyway, that's where Democrats would have to go if you make 20%, if you crack 20% of the black vote, things like that.
Earlier I said that Trump mastered social media in his campaign in 2016. And it seems to me that in 2020 and again this year, the Democrats mastered the pandemic as a tool for creating what I call a voting season rather than an election day. And the Republicans seem to be still focused on getting the vote out on election day when 3 and 4 weeks before the election even happens. It's pretty much decided because the Democrats are focusing merely on getting those ballots and getting them in the box.
Yeah, Richard, we've always known, Democrats have always known, they've talked about it. I mean, it's something I've written about it whenever they kind of celebrate the fact that, oh man, when they do the polling, when they poll people who usually don't vote, it's like an 80-20 split for Democrats. And I always said, like, go figure. People who don't pay attention to politics lean left. You know, they live in this media haze, and when you put, you know, a question before them, like, who would you vote for? Yeah, they don't pay attention. Like that's not something to celebrate. It's like, oh, all the teenagers would vote for Democrats. Yeah, great. Like the stupidest people on the planet would vote for you. I don't know why they brag about it so much. So anyway, they've always known that. And what happened, you know, we don't have to get into voter fraud in 2020. I think that's a real mixed bag. But what really might have happened in how Joe Biden got 81 million votes, there were 25 million more people who voted in 2020 than 2016 because it was mail them out, let everyone vote. Well, I got to think that if those polls were right for years, 80% or 70% of those 25 million extra votes went to the Democrats, went to Joe Biden. That's very plausible. Republicans have to stop that. And I don't think, the Democrats are going to scream that we're anti-democracy, but I think there's a superior argument to be made that no one should want people who aren't engaged, who can't get off the couch to come vote. No one should want those people voting. It's the quality of the vote, not the quantity of the vote. We want people who are engaged, getting off the couch, going to work, and then trying to squeeze in a vote, before they go home for dinner. That's how that to me is healthier. That is not anti-democracy. That's if anything pro-democracy. You can't have all these. So they need to get rid of that. State by state, outlaw it. Do whatever you can to. And this is I think this is the big fight, because that's another structural advantage for Democrats. It's ripe for fraud. You have to get out there and convict and find example after example and convince people that this was playing with fire, as the former Attorney General said. You can't mail out 350 million mail-in ballots and expect people not to cheat, or for it to be corrupted in some way, even if it's legal. The harvesting. And this is what Democrats are. They're community organizers. They're way more organized than the Republican culture. I said it recently, that the Republican culture is go to work, drive the kid to T-ball, text the wife that don't forget to vote, and that's your get out the vote strategy. Democrats are get the buses, go down to the homeless shelter, get them on, free bologna sandwich, pay them some money for the day, and because they know that there are millions and millions of votes that will probably go their way if they can just usher them to the. That's why they community organize. It's in their heritage. They've been doing it for a very long time. They weren't secret about why they do it. It's because they know that these people don't vote, and if we're the ones who give them a ride, they'll be voting for us.
As an example, I worked at the polls the last election, and on the poll pads that they give each pair of supervisors, there's a little data point at the top that shows you the number of voters registered in that county. Now, the population of Rhode Island is 1.1 million if you count everybody.
Right.
828,000 plus registered voters in Washington County alone. So if Nellie Gorbea, as Secretary of State, went against state law, by the way, and decided in 2016 that everybody was going to get a mail ballot, what influence did that have on the election? I mean, if you're sitting at home, which I was, and I got 2 letters from the Board of Canvassers in our town that addressed to my son, who hasn't voted here since 1989. Mm-hmm. I mean,
Dropbox.
There you go.
Yeah.
So,
no, I mean the voting rolls are notoriously
well, they don't take anybody off it.
Inaccurate, right?
Yeah.
So what are you saying? 800,000 registered voters in Washington County alone?
That's correct.
And there's only 1.1 million people in the
whole
state, and many of those are children under 18.
It's impossible. I mean, and if you ask, the answer is, well, we can't take people off the rolls until they haven't voted and it's acknowledged that they're no longer here.
Yeah, fair enough. Then have people vote at the voting place. I mean, they talk about stealing elections and voting integrity, and it's like, just do things like adults. They're like teenagers drinking and driving out there. They don't care. They know it favors them. They community organize. They treat the illegal Hispanic community just like they started to treat blacks in the 50s and 60s, maybe even earlier. They know that worked so well that you can see the rhetoric they use with the illegal community. They even translate it onto 2 sides of their flyers, English and Spanish. Yep. It is the same victimization rhetoric, and the communities are huddled in the inner cities, the illegal communities, and it's not like there's no evidence for it, but you could just have to use some conservatism has been relegated to common sense, really. And one of those points of common sense is that if you have, let's just call it 20 million people in the country illegally, and they're all concentrated and being organized by Democratic activists in Providence and Detroit and Chicago. I mean, why aren't you suspicious of Democratic operatives who are working with these people and bring them to rallies. Why aren't you suspicious of a mail-in operation? They just that to me is just, listen, we don't trust you, you don't trust us. Why don't we just run things like adults, and have everyone come to the polling place with an ID?
You mentioned the Bill of Rights, and it seems to me that the progressives seem to be trying to dismantle the Bill of Rights one amendment at a time. And the First and Second Amendments right now are the targets. The idea of free speech is under attack. Let's face it, the institutions of supposedly higher education and social media platforms, and even in the mainstream media, you hear this term hate speech. Anything I disagree with is misinformation or hateful. And actually in your podcast, with respect to a comment on the Second Amendment, you say that it serves to institute trust between the people and their government. And at the same time, all this is going on, private, publicly traded corporations are becoming woke. Are these trends reversible? I mean, or is it a snowball running down a hill?
No, I mean, the left can be defeated because the left is lies. They live in a universe of lies. Censorship is a lie. The danger with that is that America's, the idea of America, it's an idea. And if we're going to be a moral country and we're going to be the world's police often as we are, even though I have some qualms with, foreign policy and getting involved in so many wars and all that. But if we're going to be a good country, and conservatives look back on our country and say, on par, we're a good country who's done some great things, imperfect, but that's kind of our line. If we're going to be that country, if we're going to be good, if that's possible for a country to be good, we have to be able to think. And in order to be able to think, you got to be able to speak. And it's one of those. The First Amendment also institutes trust with our government. It's the way that. How do we know that we're better than North Korea? When North Korea faces off against us and we face off against them, how do we know and have confidence that our leaders are doing the right thing? It's because we've instituted debate, constant debate in this country against one another so that we can fine-tooth that moral point, so that we can have moral confidence when we confront the big issues, that we're the good guys. How do we know North Korea? If you're a North Korean, you don't know anything. All you know is what the government told you, right? Yep. So it's a way to have as much moral confidence in your country as possible because you've been thinking all the time, as much as a citizenry can think. I don't think there's ever been a country like that where people had so much leisure time and were able to spend a good portion of their life just thinking out the big issues and voting. And if that goes away, then you lose. Well, what happens when you stray from the truth? I mean, the truth is such a central, important theme that if you stray from it, if you deviate even a little bit, you just wade into dangerous waters. I think just as a philosophy, that's true. So censorship is dangerous for that, and that's been going on in the universities. Where this political correctness started. And everyone's been saying for decades that this is dangerous. These kids aren't allowed to speak on campus. And everyone kind of thinks like, oh, well, they're just college kids. Ha, that's a funny topic. These kids are crazy. Fast forward 15, 20 years, 30 years, and what you're seeing with woke culture, my classmates are these 45-year-olds making $500,000 a year as the diversity, equity, and inclusion officers at Disney, at the banks. The woke activists, the politically correct activists on campus who are shutting down speech and they never grew up. They never went and got a job and became conservatives. That's what everyone says. So don't worry, they'll grow up, they'll start paying taxes, they'll be conservatives. Some of them are really inspired by left-wing activism, and they figured out a way to pay themselves while they do it. And they took over the corporations in large part. I have a friend who is as conservative as I am, who is forced to teach what we're talking about right now to the new employees. He has to get up there or he'll lose his job and fake that he really cares about microaggressions at work and triggers and pronouns and all that. And that's how they took the politically correct campus and it has infiltrated into this woke culture. That's what it is. That's what's happening. You can lay that at the feet of the university. It's dangerous. You got to let people speak.
Well, the other part of the First Amendment discussion is the need for a free press, one that will report what it knows and what it sees, and not report what fits the narrative, the editorial narrative.
Yeah, I didn't even know if you were getting at the press part of the First Amendment, but yeah, that's the scary part. And like I said, if there's an institution that's influencing the culture, they'll get to the top of it. That's how organized and coordinated they are. They see something that's powerful, they will go get it, whether it's the government, the media, social media, the university. It's no wonder. I mean, the left has infiltrated the church in large part. You see that happening. It's an institution that talks to people. They'll get to the top of it and corrupt it.
In episode 9 of Good Men, you offer a commentary, and this was shortly after the insurrection, riot, event, protest, whatever you want to call it, on January 16th. And in that podcast, you referred to a policeman being beaten to death with a fire extinguisher, which turned out to be a total hoax, totally unfounded. Yet it was picked up by one media after another because they feed off each other. And the Democrats made a public spectacle with hearings on that event of January 16th. Participants are still being prosecuted, and some being held in solitary confinement still. What is your view today of the January 16th episode, and was it used to influence the election by the public spectacle that they try to make it? Yeah. And the big overall question, did Donald Trump incite a riot?
No. Getting back to free speech, you need to be able to, the left doesn't want to play this game because we have way more examples of their people being violent than ours. You need to be able to, as a politician particularly, you need to be able to speak your mind. And if you think the election was stolen, that's your opinion. You can't, people need to be held responsible for their own actions. Donald Trump and his son on that day, in the speech in Washington, they not only did they say, I know you're going to march down there peacefully, but they were actually deriding the left for all their violence and tearing down cities. They were mocking the fact that you would actually riot when you're supposed to be just protesting. It's a case that they didn't make. They're not going to get Donald Trump on it, but I still say it. I have nothing but close to contempt for our people that misbehaved on that day. And I'm under no illusion. I think it's like concentric circles. There was a handful of people in the middle that were wannabe commandos that day and thought maybe this is the revolution. I've seen enough footage to think like, what a jerk! Like that guy's breaking windows and running through the halls and trying to stop proceedings. Sure, that was there. I think you have to be honest. That's fine. Then there's a body of people around them that sympathize with that opinion, but are just kind of taking the tour. Then there's the large majority, the circle around them that kind of crept in to take a look and then were led in by police officers. And then 99% of people were actually still outside. The Democrats have no. The most nuanced among us all of a sudden don't want to have any nuance with this conversation. They want to be like Donald Trump orchestrated it and influenced it. But yeah, I knew right away that we were going to probably see images of that moment in the history books. They'll never stop talking about it. They used it to destroy not only Donald Trump, and this is where the National Review, 6 years ago had a point about Donald Trump, what he was going to bring to the conservative movement, or the brand, is that there's Trumpism and there's traditional conservatism, and these people want to destroy traditional conservatism, and they will use Trumpism and conflate it. They have no interest in being nuanced about this. They will destroy the Republican Party based on, we need to be near perfect. These people can burn down every city in America for months on end. Union violence, campus violence. They can burn down pregnancy centers after Roe v. Wade was overturned. The moment Republicans make a mistake like that, all of a sudden we're the neo-fascists, right? So I hope that answered your question. The Democrats totally exploited it.
One of the points that bothered me was the 2nd Congressional District election, where the attack ads on Alan Fung claimed that 5 police officers died, which is totally unfounded. The policeman who was supposedly beaten to death died of a stroke the next day, and the medical examiner said the events of the preceding day had nothing to do with it. The other 4 died weeks later of a couple of suicides and other issues, heart attacks, whatever, but weeks after that happened. But yet, the ad that was run by the super PAC supporting Seth Magaziner said 5 police officers were killed during the riot, and excoriated Alan Fung for saying he wouldn't turn his back on Trump. And then they came with the ad that, oh, if Fung is elected, he's going to vote for a national ban on abortion, which he never said. And then, of course, they brought out the old Democrat canard about Republicans are going to end Social Security, which gets old folks like me riled up. So I don't understand why the Republicans don't refute these claims and ads rather than depict themselves as nice persons who have great plans for everybody. Their ads are always cheery and so forth. But when the Democrats realized that Alan Fung was actually leading in the polls, they turned up the heat. And Fung didn't seem to do anything about it or respond to it.
Is that right? Well, I mean, up to each individual candidate and campaign to fight. And I think that's one thing that Trump brought, is that he, I think DeSantis maybe learned a little bit from Trump, that you can go after these people and you can win the public heart. But yeah, go figure. That's what they've done to any successful conservative, whether it's George W. Bush, Fox News, or like a Limbaugh type. They destroy that target and then they'll tie you to him. And they discredit any successful conservative talking head, imagine yourself being, say, a sophomore in college and you need to write a term paper. You can't cite Fox News, but you could cite the news. You could never cite some of our famous figures, or if you're in an argument with a friend and where'd you hear that? I heard it on Limbaugh's show. Is like, you can't cite Rush Limbaugh. They've destroyed him in the minds of the public. Perfectly credible figure. So that's what they do. They destroy and they discredit the people that are kind of our heroes or our resources one by one. And then in something like a campaign, they'll just destroy Trump, say a police officer died, and tie you to it. And it's really hard. I think, again, if we lived in a fair world with a fair media, they wouldn't get away with it. I think Republicans a lot of times, they're just afraid of the media attacks. They try to thread the needle instead of fighting back like a DeSantis or Trump, and being just, some people aren't that talented at being articulate and good at argument. But I think in large part, a lot of Republicans are just like, oh man, the only place I have on my side is conservative talk radio, which has an audience of 1%. So. They try to thread the needle and do the best they can. I think the most dishonest thing going on is the information war with the media.
When you say 1%, I think the successors to Rush Limbaugh, the 2 guys that are took over his platform, have the largest radio audience, 20 million people, which is the largest talk show radio audience in the country. So there's a lot more influence there. And on the other side at Fox News, Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity are very highly rated and against their competition. Yeah,
conservatism is popular on a fair playing field. Isn't that amazing? That once it's a fair playing field, I mean, remember they tried to, again, liberals are often delusional, and they think that the people are behind them and the majority is behind them all the time. So they just like, oh, well, if we can get on talk radio, it'll work. So they launched Air America 20 years ago with Al Franken, and it just completely bombed, where they put millions of dollars behind it. No one in the free market wanted to listen to it. They're driving home from work, and it was like, there's plenty of talent on the air. Al Franken's a comedian. They had other great hosts on there with plenty of talent. But it was the ideas and probably the smugness that turned everyone off, and it completely bombed. And yeah, the most popular media figures out there on a fair playing field are often conservatives. That type of confidence needs to be realized and taken into the future, I guess, to win.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I just want to get your thoughts on what I call the crisis on the southern border. You referred to, Donald Trump was trying to erect a wall, which every Border Patrol person that is spoken to said cuts down the amount of illegal immigration. But when Biden came in, of course, on inauguration day, he signed a bunch of executive orders, which basically said, okay, come on, the border's open. And you referred also to amnesty not being possible. At least 5 million people have been have come into this country across the southern border. Most of them were certainly not screened. They were uninoculated. Many of them are illiterate, unskilled. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has already floated the idea of amnesty for all these people.
Yeah.
What are you?
Crazy. That's what I mean about conservatism being relegated to common sense. I mean, you can get Chuck Schumer, not hard to find, on camera talking about we need to protect the border, too many illegal aliens coming into the country about, I think, only 15 years ago.
Yep.
Those Clinton Democrats, that common sense is just gone. I mean, boys in the girls' locker room, a national border, a common language. Even something like capitalism, they're flat out anti-capitalist now. Bernie Sanders is now the economic voice of the Democratic Party, AOC. Mm-hmm. There are some, before you can even get to slashing that federal government down to its constitutional size, that's conservatism. Real limited government, the state's taking over the majority of issues in this country. You have to just stand there and scream that boys should not be in the girls' locker room. And all of a sudden, it's like, what, you're conservative? It's like, I didn't know there was anything conservative about this. That's not what we mean by conservative.
How about boys competing in girls' sports?
Yeah, they've lost their mind. This is not just a few wackos on a college campus. This is Democratic Party platform stuff. I don't want to start with the social issues, but 9-month full-term abortions is insane. The transgender ideology is insane. No borders is insane. And when you get Democrats on camera, they're going to start talking about how difficult the situation is. But there's plenty of rhetoric from them that basically, they're a very race-obsessed party.
Excuse me.
I'm not afraid to say that it's a racist party. The anti-white racism that comes out of the Democratic field now. It's this kind of we need to let them in because we sympathize because they're brown. So we need more brown people. The colorblind society is gone. That Martin Luther King comment, I thought everyone kind of agreed common sense in America is that skin tone doesn't matter. That's gone. So if you stand up for a colorblind society, and true equality instead of equity. Equity. How communist do they have to get before someone realizes like something happened to this party? Bernie Sanders was a former communist romantic who honeymooned, I think, either in Cuba or the Soviet Union, Moscow. This guy is now a progressive, caucusing with the Democratic Party. He's the guy who they want to lead their party into the future, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. How obvious does it have to be that they just got rid of the word communism and they went with liberal and progressive? So it's not a disguise anymore. They're out there, and I don't know. I don't think the traditional press is going to call them out on it, but there's plenty of us doing the work to let everyone know that it's just not Kennedy's party anymore. That's all.
We have a brief minute or so left. I'm going to ask you a kind of a lightning question. Is President Joe Biden merely a puppet for the progressive wing of the Democrat Party?
Biden is a vote for the left-wing agenda. He's a figurehead. He's clearly being controlled. Joe Biden doesn't know what equity means. He doesn't know what trans rights are. He's completely being fed this information, and not just because he's clearly has faculty issues. The same thing was for Donald Trump. Is that Alan Fung? I don't know. A lot of people call him a moderate Republican. I think that's probably true about Alan Fung. I've always known him as a good Republican. But even if he goes to Washington and he's an 80-85% vote for the Republican agenda, that's how far apart the agendas are, the left and right wings of this country. I would have voted for Fetterman if he was the Republican vote. They said the same thing about Herschel Walker, not a bright guy down in Georgia. Doesn't matter. Got to get him in. That's how serious the Democrats are not messing around. They get into power, they open up the border, and they start letting the boys run around in your daughter's locker room.
Thank you for coming on this program. It certainly has been provocative, and we'll have some comments coming in about it. But to members of the Jewish faith in our audience, I want to wish you all, on behalf of State of the State, Happy Hanukkah. And to our Christian followers, Merry Christmas. And let us all pray for a better 2023. Thank you.